Oh,
We are
really?
live.
Okay, so last week we introduced philosophy of math and the problem of Platonism. So one of the first things I want to do is just go over very briefly what the Platonist position is. Okay, so like a summary of Platonism. Okay, now just as a reminder, yes, of course, Platonism is kind of kind of originated from Plato's ideas, but there are a lot of people that identify as a Platonist and they divorce themselves from Plato's original ideas. So we say Platonism with a little p. So we have Platonism. Okay. So on Platonism, can y'all see the screen?
Yes.
Good. On Platonism, there are basically three things about mathematical objects, right? Number one, they're abstract. Okay. And I'm going to give the opposite of abstract on the side because we did talk about that very briefly. So they're not concrete. So we talked very briefly about this, what it meant in the last episode, but basically it doesn't cause anything. It's not really the effect of anything, right? The number 9 doesn't kill people, and no one makes the number 9, right? It doesn't make any sense, at least not on Platonism. Okay. Number 2, the sort of second tenet of Platonism is that all mathematical objects or statements are known a priori. Okay. As opposed to not a posteriori. I always screw up the spelling there. Maybe someone can help me.
Poster.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, poster. Yeah. I.
Yeah. I always mess up the spelling there. So that's to say that the way you, for at least under Platonism, that you come to know these things, generally speaking, is through reasoning or having some kind of innate, and there's a kind of innateness of the concepts in the mind, right? So Plato said that you never seen a perfect square, but you have a concept of a square, so therefore it's like innate in your mind or something like that. Okay. 3, we have that they're necessary. Anything that's true of math is a necessary truth, meaning that it's not contingent. It could have not. It has to be false, right? Not contingent. That if there is some mathematical truth, it's true in every case. Okay, in every possible world. We briefly went over that Frege was a big defender of Plato. Okay, or Platonism with a little p, I should say. And so that's kind of like one of your contemporaries in terms of Platonism, right? So that's kind of what I think the main I guess core of what happened last week is we discussed these terms, and we did discuss other distinctions, but we're going to bring those back again because we're about to talk about Kant, right? But in this episode, we're in episode 2. We're going to talk about something called the integration challenge, and then we're going to really look at Kant's view of mathematics. Okay, so so let's just start with the integration problem. Okay, so with the integration problem, last week we mentioned the difference between metaphysics and epistemology. Okay. So the integration problem is basically summarized in on pages, if you're following along the book, 12 and 13. Pages 12 to 13. And the idea is that what is the nature of math, right? And then, so that's this is the metaphysical question, right? Oh, sorry, mathematical objects. I think that would be better. Mathematical. That's not how you spell math. Mathematical objects. Okay, and this is the metaphysical question. Okay, this is the metaphysical question. Whereas, the epistemological question is going to be something like, my thing is freaking out on me. What or how do we come to know, right? How do we come to know mathematical truths? Okay, and this is the epistemological question. epistemology. Okay, and so what Linnebaugh is saying is that there's a challenge about how we integrate these, right? Okay, what is the nature of these? When the number 9 or an infinity or a set? Okay, well, how we come to know these kinds of truths, right? We have to integrate this in some way. So, if we look, he used this phrase called in medias res. In medias res. Okay. Now, I think this in Latin, this means like in the middle of things or amongst everything or amongst things or something like that. And the idea is that he is not trying to convince a skeptic about mathematical, whether we can know mathematical truths at all. Okay, so let me give you an example. There's a question about how we can rely on our sense experience or our cognitive faculties, or that we can, basically, aka why is it that I can rely on my eyeballs, right? Now, when we're asking this question, we might have to use our eyes in order to answer the question, right? But it seems circular. Like on page, let's see, on page, getting that page number, on page 14, he compares it to, is this like a case where a man buys a second copy of a newspaper to confirm what the first copy says? Well, that seems kind of silly, right? But that's not how he wants to characterize how we overcome the integration challenge, right? He wants to say that it's more like trying to understand that our senses are reliable, and explain why they're reliable while assuming that they are reliable. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is so. If everyone looks at page 14, I'll briefly put it up here. Okay. We are proceeding in medias res, not trying to convince a skeptic. The mild circularity, therefore, does not trivialize the project. We are presupposing that our perceptual beliefs are reliable in order to explain why they're reliable, right? So,
of course.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that seems almost tautological. Like, you couldn't explain why they were reliable if you weren't first presupposing that to begin with.
Right, and if someone comes along and says, well, why should we accept that they're reliable in the first place, or that they're reliable in the first place? Well, you would just look at them and say, everything I'm doing right now is not to try to convince you that they are. Okay, so I think that's the kind of response. So in the same way, if someone says, well, I'm skeptical that we can even have mathematical knowledge, well, Linnebaugh is going to be like, we don't care about you, right? We're not talking, we're saying that we definitely know that we have mathematical knowledge. We just want to explain how or why, how we come to the mathematical knowledge. Okay, so he talks about that very briefly. So if the idea, let's see if we keep on going down. I don't want to get to Kant just yet. Did anybody want to contribute while I'm collecting my thoughts about? There was something else. Oh yes. Okay. One last thing. The notion of explanation is tricky in philosophy, and I'm glad he does mention a distinction between two kinds of explanation. There's causal explanation, and of course, non-causal. Okay, there are two kinds of explanation. So, in non-causal explanation, you have something like logic and math, whereas causal explanation might deal with science or empirical truths. So this is just some characterization. So, of course, there are people that might think differently, but the point is that if I want to explain, why it is that I have a particular, why I'm having certain symptoms of a disease, and someone points out, well, you have a virus, that's a kind of causal explanation. The virus had some kind of causal interaction such that you have these symptoms, right? But in the case of non-causal explanation, think of let's just use a kind of logical truth that's used in math, like transitivity, right? If A is B and B is C, then A is C, right? That's transitivity. Now, there's a sense in which there's explanation there. What explains why one premise follows another, or why the conclusion follows from the premises, might be something like identity, right? Might be some kind of logical axiom, right? So when we're trying to explain things in mathematics, he wants to say that we're not interested in the causal connection as much as we're interested in what explains the sort of truth value. What are the truth conditions that would render something to be, of course, true or justified or whatever, right? That what explains why we have knowledge is not something that I think he's taking to be a causal question, or question about causality, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that, yeah, just because some X explains Y, well, there's an open question. Are you talking about causal or non-causal? Okay, that's on that's on the top of page 14 for those that are following the book. Okay, so that's basically the integration challenge, right? That or at least question. Now he does want to say that on page 13. So let me show everyone on page 13 that he thinks this is distinctively philosophical question, right? In terms of how to integrate these two categories, right? But he doesn't want to go all the way in terms of like a Cartesian first philosophy. So for those that don't know anything about Descartes was known for, okay, I want to start at the foundation of knowledge, so let me doubt everything that could possibly be wrong, right? And so he throws out all of his sense perception or anything that he acquired from sense perception, because he could be hallucinating. He talked about, well, no, he didn't use a hallucination. He talked about the evil demon as potentially deceiving him in a way where like his sense perception wasn't reliable, right? And of course, he doesn't want to say that despite it being a distinctively philosophical question, we're not going so crazy as to we got to start from the very beginning of our knowledge. No, we are kind of establishing that math is reliable, that math, there is mathematical knowledge, and we're not going so far back as to build from square one how we get to mathematical knowledge. He doesn't want to do that, right? And that's kind of like enveloped in his like in medias res kind of atmosphere, or his medias res approach, right? Here he talks about medias res right here. Medias res, yeah. So I think that's pretty much it for the integration challenge. I don't think he jumps into solutions. I think that's throughout the book. Whoops. I think my thing just disconnected. Give me a second. Give me a second. But yeah, does anybody have anything to say on that section before we move on?
Not particularly.
Okay. So if we're moving on, which we will once I get this, they're making me put this code in again. 073-185. Oh, no, I have to start over. Yeah, so let's talk about Kant. Okay, so Kant is insanely hard to interpret. Insanely hard to interpret. Like, he's like the Hegel for analytic philosophy. Hegel is even worse, right? Arguably even worse, right? But he's like a continental philosopher. He's continental philosophy's problem, not the analytic. But despite that, there are treasures in Kant. It's hard to be interested in philosophy and not be interested in Kant. Very, very difficult. They almost, with respect to analytic philosophy and Kant, they almost go hand in hand, right? Huge guy, and in the domain. So let me start a new page. So a couple things about. Let me make sure I didn't want to miss anything. Yeah. Okay. So we have to go back to some distinctions that we talked about in the last episode, right? So the distinction between a priori and a posteriori. We just talked about that. Okay. And we also have to reintroduce the analytic synthetic distinction, because this is very important to understand to get at Kant's view. Okay. So about mathematics. So to review, a priori, right? Basically, here the knowledge. Remember, this is all reflecting knowledge, right? This is about knowledge. Analytic synthetic has to do with semantics. So I guess I mean S, K, and S is for knowledge, and then semantics, right, respectively. So a priori knowledge, you basically before, right? Before experience, and then after experience. Okay. Now Kant thought that knowledge was, that mathematical knowledge was a priori. Okay. Now you might want to. There's a meaningful question here. Okay. Most of us learned a lot of our mathematical knowledge by experience, right? It seems like that at the very least, right? My teacher taught me about the fact that the degrees within a triangle equal to 180, right? We learned a lot of our mathematical things, namely through, our experience, right? So Kant understands this, right? He understands this objection, and he makes this interesting, very, very interesting distinction, okay, in order to respond to it. So he talks about your cognition from experience versus cognition with experience.
Mhm.
There's a big difference between these two. I know it seems subtle, but for sure, Kant does not want to say that this is true. That he wants to say that we have cognition with experience, not from experience. So in the same way that our mathematical knowledge is a priori, despite that many of these beliefs are only made possible with experience, right? So I guess to try to illustrate what this means, maybe think about something like a shape would only exist, or I guess a line would only really exist with direction, right? Maybe that's how we define a line, maybe, but the idea is that dimensionality, right? And lines, right? Lines, if they exist, they come with a dimension. Okay, I don't know if this is a good example. Maybe my physics people in the call could correct me, but the idea is that it's almost like a dependency relation rather than a causal relation. Okay, so it's not that he thought that you got cognition because of experience, but it's just that with cognition you have experience. Okay,
I would agree with that. Yes.
Right. So that was Kant's view, and this is on page 15 for those that want to read a little bit more about it. Maybe get a different explanation of it. Okay. So that was a big one. Now, are there philosophers that think that math was or mathematical objects are apprehended by experience? Well, yes, of course. Right. So people that thought that mathematical knowledge came from experience, like in the way that Kant doesn't want to, wants to reject, are going to be people like we talked about last time, John Stuart Mill, and Quine. Okay, they thought that knowledge of mathematical truth came from experience. In fact, I don't know a lot about Mill, but definitely Quine. I think Quine was a sort of empiricist that rejected a priori knowledge almost altogether. Okay. So there are some weird empiricists that will say that, yeah, while knowledge starts with experience, there are a priori propositions. Quine wasn't one of those, but the idea is that, yes, you have, unlike Kant, people that think that you get this kind of knowledge from experience. Okay. Yeah. So now let's move on.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Because the way I would see it is that there is some mathematical knowledge that would be at a more advanced level that you probably would gain at least more from experience. But I don't think that all of it comes from experience. Like addition and subtraction, to me, you don't learn those through experience. Like when you brought up the triangle and how all the drawing a blank on the technical term for the corners, vertices, is that the word I'm looking for? Whatever it is, they have to add up to 180. I think that anyone, whether they were taught that or not, could come to know that. Okay, so Kant pulls one of the cleverest moves to try to address what you're saying. Now, whether it's intelligible, it might be sensical to some, but it is like really, really clever, and it's very hard to explain. But basically, well,
to understand that, we have to understand the relationship between the a priori, a posteriori, and analytic and synthetic. Okay, so because Kant is going to say that while math is a priori, it's synthetic.
Yes. But the thing is, when I was reading that, I was like, I think for the most part, I can agree with that.
Yeah, we have to get into it, right? So in order to get into it, let's explain for the viewers analytic and synthetic. So now you might hear or read in some contemporary philosophy, or the way, maybe even what I've said, is that analytic is true by meaning, whereas synthetic is true by some other fact about the world. Okay, so but that's not technically how Kant puts it. Okay, and he puts it very similarly. I think that I'll explain, right? And he puts it very similarly, though. So what the idea of something being analytically true is that concepts with the subject predicate are contained within each other. So let me explain what this means, right? So he would say this: a triangle. Well, actually,
you could have just drawn a triangle instead of writing it out.
Yeah, but the thing is that I don't want to give a triangle as an example because he thinks it's synthetic, right? So that, whereas I think it might be analytic. But anyways, there's a lot of first of all, man, I'm sorry, I'm doing this out of order, but I'll go back to it. But the idea is that a priori synthetic claims are highly controversial, right? That's one of the combinations that the logical positivists in the 1900s rejected. Okay, they accepted analytic and a priori together, and they accepted a posteriori and synthetic together, but they rejected a priori synthetic together, and no one really accepts analytic and a posteriori together. No one goes in the direction. No one does. No one even thinks about these coming together. Okay, but with respect to a priori and synthetic, this is a big question mark in philosophy, right? But this is not so objectionable to say that a priori goes with analytic and a posteriori goes with synthetic, right? But Kant was trying to say that these can go together, and that's what's really, I guess, novel and controversial, but not crazy.
Ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So to understand what Kant meant by analytic, he's going to say something like this: a bachelor, okay, is an unmarried man. Okay, that unmarried man, that these two concepts are contained within the concept of bachelor. So these are contained.
Quick question, just for the subject predicate word. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in that sentence, the bachelor would be the subject and unmarried man would be the predicate?
Right.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
So the idea is that and this is an identity relation. So it's not that is a predication, that's true. But I think the idea, what I meant by subject predicate, is that you have one side of the equation and the other side of the equation, and the concepts are contained within each other, right? So a bachelor contains the concept of unmarried, and it contains the concept of man. That is how Kant phrased it. And while you might think that just means that bachelor means unmarried man, well, no, it's an interesting elaboration, this idea of containment, and it's novel to Kant, right? It's unique to Kant, I should say. And why it matters, well, I'll tell you, right? Kant thought that certain truths, certain mathematical truths, that there was no such containment that exists. So let me give an example, okay? When we look, you see, in this way where we have a bachelor contains unmarried, 7 plus 5 equals 12. He didn't think it made sense to say that 12 was contained in 7 plus 5.
Yeah, exactly.
right? And vice versa. That there's no what would it mean to say that these concepts are contained within one another, right? And that's what didn't make sense for him. Okay, while you could understand that 12 is the result of 7 plus 5 a priori, right? The fact that this containment condition doesn't apply means that, oh, well, mathematical truths are synthetic.
Yep.
Okay, so, well, then there's Mr. Philosopher, hello, synthetic is tied to a posteriori. If it's synthetic, you have to know some fact about the world. And then this gets into a problem with how previous philosophers and Kant, like Berkeley, I wouldn't really say Berkeley, but people before Kant thought about how we understood objects in the world. And so that gets us into this weird, I have to explain some stuff to get to that. So let me give a kind of the idealism view. So idealism, okay? Generally speaking, I'm not really talking about Berkeley's idealism or Kant's idealism just yet, but the idea of idealism is that our subject only has representations of the world. Okay, they're representations. The subject has representations, and there's this kind of correspondence between the world and those representations. That I don't know what I wrote there. Okay, so but the problem is that we're kind of trapped in our subject, right? That we can only really have representations. Okay, whereas something like naive realism, the subject has direct access to the world. That there's no representation. No representation. That says representation. I don't care what you say. Okay. So the point is that on idealism, there's a barrier. Because all you have access to is your internal states. What does it mean to say you have access to the world? No, you only represent the world in your mind. That's kind of what idealism is trying to say. But realism, naive realism, is something like, I can access the world. So when I look at a tree, I don't have a representation of the tree. I'm seeing the tree as it is, the thing in itself. Okay? So Kant operated in this framework. He rejected naive realism, as well as many others before him. Okay? And we don't have to talk about those concerns today, but just so you get a kind of glimpse of what where Kant is coming from, right? That he does reject that there's some kind of barrier between the world and the subject, and that we only really have access to our representations of the world. Well, Mr. Philosopher, Mr. Kant, the world, if you're saying that math objects, or truths are out here, okay, there's a problem. How are we going to get over the barrier? Okay, and this is very difficult to explain, and so I'm going to preface it with this, right?
Is this where categories come in?
Can you elaborate? Maybe I'm not understanding.
The Kantian categories that, basically this is built in.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, okay. That's where it comes in. Yes.
I think we call it categories.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not a Kantian expert, but I only read the book, and then I have very few back. It's hard to understand. If you ever read the first sentence or first paragraph of the Critique of Pure Reason, it's a headache. Just read a commentary. Save yourself time. Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, but the point.
Don't ever read Kant.
Yeah, don't ever read Kant. Read things about Kant. Right.
Yeah, go to the store, buy a volume of Kant, and immediately toss it in the fireplace, and burn it.
And then sniff the smoke that ensues. And
that's right.
In this way, you will grasp the Kant.
Okay, so
the smoke is the way.
The smoke is the way.
You can't grasp it.
What does
Kant?
That's like, oh man, I've heard that so many times. Okay, so that's something that I was around people that talk about Kant, but I can't take it anymore, really. But anyways, so what does Kant do to overcome this? Right, math is out it's like an object, right? And if I'm subjected to idealism, then I can only really represent it. But Kant recognizes that can't be the case. We can't represent a circle, right? We have the concept itself somehow. Okay, so what he does is that there's this faculty of intuition. That's what he calls it, and this is not a straightforward. Kant never gives a straightforward account of what this is, but there are glimpses of what this could mean. Okay. That intuition is closely tied to perception, but not exactly perception. Okay. Think about your intuition as your, like, I don't want to say this, but I'm going to, as your like sixth sense. Okay. Or by understanding in terms of who you are as an agent. Okay. That part of what it means to be a rational agent is to have this faculty intuition where you have a special access to different things like time, space, and mathematical truths. That this faculty intuition is built of those things. Okay? Such that you can know them. So it's not that you're having a perception of time, space, causality, and mathematical truths, right? And even God. It's that is sort of built into the fiber of agency within this faculty of intuition. Now, are you saying, Danny, that sounds like crazy mumbo jumbo? Well, people dedicate their lives to trying to understand what I just uttered, right? And while it may seem kind of insane, the idea of building mathematical concepts, time and space into agency while escaping the whole representation plus world thing and escaping that these are sort of like built into our reasoning, like we can just reason to these things, is kind of ingenious. Okay. So he's escaping the representation world issue, and he's escaping that math is known just by understanding the meanings or grasping concepts within our mind. He's saying it's kind of built into our fabric of being, or within this intuition, that we know these things by intuition. So let me appeal to Lenovo's explanation. You're getting a lot of me, but not enough of the author, right? So this is where he says it. Blah blah blah. Please let me find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. So he talks about the Copernican turn, right? That the page 17. Yeah, and I have it displayed now. I should have it displayed. Okay. So what I was talking about, the whole representation issue with knowing objects, that was pre-Copernican. That's what he calls this the Copernican turn. Actually, Kant's words are saying this is a big sort of paradigm shift for philosophy of mathematics and all of that, right? Metaphysics. But anyways, before Kant, that there are these objects, and the way we understand the objects is by mental representations. Now, Kant is offering this thing called intuition, right? And remember, so interesting thing to note, this, what I'm highlighting right here, since the knowledge synthetic is about objects, right? Well, objects are in the world, right? He's saying, no, intuition. We can know things. We can know through these things by intuition, not through our representation and through conceptual analysis, which is what happens in the analytic domain. Okay, so right here, this is Kant's words. If intuition has to conform to the constitution of objects, then I don't see how we can know anything of them a priori. But if the object conforms to the constitution of our faculty of intuition, then I can make sense of everything. What does this mean? Well, it's going to determine what you and how you interpret this. And we'll leave it at that. What does it mean to say that these things are conform to our constitution of our faculty of intuition? You know, you could spend days on trying to understand what this means. Okay, but that's the move that Kant makes. Okay, So what are some takebacks? Sorry, it's not takebacks. I'm losing.
Takeaways.
Yeah, takeaways. Thank you.
Takeaways. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taught high school since 6:45, and now I'm nearing my juice. My fuel is going out. But what is our takeaways?
That's what makes coffee a good thing.
Well, I'm on Dr. Pepper right now, and I drank 4 cups of coffee already, so I don't know what it takes.
Does teaching high school make you dumber?
Maybe sex
No,
is what you need
I
to
learned-
recharge the
no.
batteries.
I like teaching high school. But anyways,
Yeah.
well, depends on what school you are. It really does. Okay, I have synthetic knowledge. Okay, so our takeaways is this: analytic, synthetic, a priori, a posteriori. Kant thinks it's a priori. He thinks it's synthetic. Wow, not many people expected that one, right? To a point where now a lot of people reject it. So the logical positivists come in and say, no analytics, no analytic, synthetic a priori, that goes out the window. There's only analytic a priori or a priori analytic truths and a synthetic a posteriori truths. But Kant tries to make sense of a priori synthetic. Okay. Anybody want to say anything?
So, has anybody ever come up with like a third option or a third
Quine
category? There's analytic, there's synthetic. Is there a third one that they've proposed to resolve that issue? Or is it
the move now is just to reject the distinction. A lot of philosophers today are just saying there's no such distinction. There's a paper that was written by Quine called The Two Dogmas of Empiricism that is cited as one of the best responses or the biggest problems for people that accept the analytic synthetic distinction. Okay. So that's one move, is just to reject the distinction, but no, I'm not familiar with a analytic synthetic plus some other kind of category.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. So the overview, I really like this little graph here. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Kant thought that, and Brouwer, Plato, that they were a priori synthetic. These are the people that, but Kant was like the first one to kind of phrase it in these terms. Brouwer came after Kant, and of course Plato came way before Kant. Frege still is sticking to analytic. Okay. And that is where chapter 2 sort of starts, right? So I'm not gonna go to chapter 2 yet. Where is no. Look, where is it? Guys, right here. I highlighted it right here. So Kant's time. Okay, so I think this is kind of what maybe Leo was saying, that Kant was working with too simplistic of a mathematical domain, right? There was no set theory, right? You didn't have people like Hilbert and Cantor and Frege coming along, kind of discovering stuff like set theory and stuff. There was none of that, right? So what the Linnebo is saying is that, okay, with the emergence of these new things, these new mathematical tools, there needs to be a revised understanding of math, philosophically speaking. And so one of these is Frege offers logicism, which is basically chapter 2. That idea that all truths about numbers, from naturals to the reals, are understood or reducible in terms of logic. Now, logic, everyone agrees, is analytic. So this is why Frege thinks it's analytic, right? Logic, definitely analytic. So if it's the case that math is logic, then math is analytic. That's the argument, essentially. And he does a lot of work to try to reduce math into logic. It's not so easy. It was not an easy project. And in fact, I will say I don't take a position on any of this, but because I just don't. Part of the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to take a position. I just can't yet.
You mean a position on logicism?
No, a position of just any view in math, right? But I will say logicism is a dying breed right now. For some reason, logicism is not healthy.
It's really not surprising to me, honestly.
Yeah, there are many people that think that, look, math is its own thing, guys. You have logic, and it might be that math relies on logic or dependent on logic, but it's not reducible to it. right? I might depend on, oxygen, but I'm not understood in terms of oxygen.
Yep.
Right? So in the same way, maybe math is dependent on logic, but it's not reducible to it. A lot of people have that view, right? So, but there are defenders of Frege, and they're taken seriously. But I'm just saying, in the literature, it's not a common view. Okay, but it's still very interesting to kind of go over.
I did want to say really quickly that the way that I would view the relationship between logic and mathematics is like a Venn diagram, but where the section where they cross over is much thicker than like a traditional Venn diagram. I would argue that logic qualifies and mathematics quantifies, that you couldn't really reduce one to the other fully, but that they are very much related. And I think that the statement logic qualifies, math quantifies, for me, makes a lot of sense in describing where the distinctions between the two would be.
Yeah, I think that kind of reminds me of what's being said here. Okay, so in this part, and fictionalism as well, but I think formalism is not saying that any of these are fictitious. Is that, look, we shouldn't be thinking, formalists are going to say we shouldn't be thinking of mathematical statements as true or false, rather than something like proved or unproved, or correct or incorrect. Like, so they're going to look at it as a system, like a kind of conventional system, right? Fictionalists are going to say, yeah, like sort of like conventional, like math is conventional, meaning like invented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, that is the take that I would argue that math is a convention of the human mind.
Yeah. That's I think that's Brouwer is some kind of conventionalist. So that's going to be they're going to mention that fictionalism is that the idea is that we can talk about Harry Potter, but we don't have to say that these are like, we don't have to say that there's like some kind of like robust sense of truth or correspondence when we say Harry Potter has a scar, right? We can it's just useful fiction. That's the so he'll go over all of this, but the idea is that I think what you were saying is when we think about a logical connective. Here we go. I know. I think I know how to maybe convey a little bit of what you're saying, and then what I'm trying to say as well. So let me give you an example of a logical thing here. So let me zoom in big time. Okay, so everyone can see. So if I said if A, then B, A, and therefore B. So is this true or false?
Well,
that makes sense.
valid, but is it sound?
Well, the point is that it doesn't mean it's valid. We can talk about its correct form, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the correct form. But to say that modus ponens, which is the form here, is like true, seems kind of weird, right?
Yeah, it seems weird to talk about it in terms of a truth value.
Yeah, right. I mean, so the idea is that the logical connectives themselves are a matter of being correct or incorrect, or you almost think of it as prescriptions, right? That this should follow, right? Well, what does it mean to say that should is true? Maybe that's how you might think of it. But whereas something like 2 + 2 = 4 is going to be that's going to be true. But for someone that wants to reduce this to something like this, well, I think what Leo is saying is that, okay, well, then that kind of dissolves maybe some of the truth value of math. But I'm not so sure. I'm just speculating here, so maybe I should not say anything.
Okay, A and B can be true, basically. Those are
but they could be false. They could be false too.
They can be false or they can be true, but what you have there is a logical form, and that you cannot say is true. That you can say is valid, and you can say it's valid and sound, but you can't say the whole thing is true.
Exactly. The logical
form is like a correct chess move more than it is.
Yeah.
Is a correct chess move true or false? It doesn't make sense to talk about it using those words.
You have to load it with A and B before you can start talking about truths, and of course, A and B does have the true and false characteristics.
Yes.
So does like a geometric proof or theorem, whenever you go set it out to lay it out and explain it and show its correctness, is that spoke of in terms of validity and soundness, or
To logicists, maybe. To
I would
logicists,
I would argue that you can. It would depend on the complexity of the mathematical proof or the mathematical, formalism or axiom that you're trying to prove. Where, like in mathematics, complexity essentially refers to the number of logical steps that one needs to take to arrive at the conclusion that demonstrates the validity of that proof. I would prefer personally to use the terms like it is valid or it is proven rather than that it is true or false, but I'm not going to say that the way that I would prefer to word it has to be the correct way.
Well, there's something else interesting if you want to go back to that modus ponens.
Oh yeah.
There's something else kind of interesting about it, is that if you load it with A and A happens to be true, then B will be true as a result of the structure of that logical form.
Yes.
Oh
Okay.
no! Wait. If A, okay, I see. What are you saying?
If you choose A to be true, then this logical form will take B to truth as well.
No, I don't know if that's true. Let me think through that. So look, if 2 + 2 = 4, then 5 + 5 = 11. If this is true, but this is clearly false.
Then it wouldn't be valid. No,
I'm just saying this is. I'm just saying not.
Sound.
Or no, wouldn't be sound.
Well, the point, I thought you were saying that if this is true, then this is true, but that's not.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, it doesn't. Let's see. If it is true, hang on. What the hell's it? Let me run the truth table on that thing.
Well, this is just a conditional. This is not an argument, right?
It's a truth table. Okay, so that one's true. That one's false. That one's false. Okay, if that one's true, you're correct. Yeah, it does not necessarily take it to truth. If
oh God, that'd be great. If I had $1, then I have $1 million. I wish that were true. I hope your logic works.
Well,
one
or
day.
kind of works that way. Or kind of works that way. You can you can pull a second term of an or right out of your ass, and
but like inclusive or exclusive or.
Just or.
No, they're two types. They're very there's like A or B, and then there's
I have
A
to review my logic course to explain that again. But
yeah, A or B. This is well. No, this could either be inclusive or exclusive. I think the idea, like, if you want, I think there's I'm trying to give an example of inclusive or guys, can someone help me? Inclusive or. I mean, you can have both options. That's the idea. Something like
that's what I thought. And then exclusive or means that it can only be one or the other.
One or the other, right?
Where inclusive is it could be either, but it can also be both. It doesn't have to be exclusively one or the other.
Right. But I'm thinking of an example. I'm trying to think of an example.
So am I. An example of inclusive or exclusive or both.
Well, exclusive is probably pretty easy, but inclusive. So, like, it could be like you can have carrots and potatoes. You can have carrots and potatoes or both, right? I think carrots or potatoes. I'm trying to think of like food, I guess. Like, it seems like you can have a choice between the two, or you can have both, right? That seems to be inclusive, right? But yeah, I think the point is that whether I'm right or wrong about whatever the example might be, there are different kinds of ors, and you have to be a little careful. Mm-hmm. All right, I think
what
that
I was saying was sort of the opposite, but anyway, we can do a logic course at another time, but it's kind of the opposite. That
okay,
yeah.
Well, let's just make sure. Does anybody want to say anything about the text?
What do you mean?
Well, anything that I talked a lot, but if anything stuck out.
To me, not immediately, no.
Okay. So now, chapter 2, logicism. So let's assign the reading for next time. So
I did a little bit of skimming, and I thought personally that we should do 2.1 and 2.2 to start off with, because I think it's in 2.3 where we start to get into some like predicate. No, I'm drawing a blank, not predicate logic. The other P. Why am I drawing a blank? No, not presupposition.
Propositional.
Yeah, is it
Propositional?
presupposition? I don't know why that
Right.
wasn't sounding right
No,
in my head.
it's propositional logic.
There you go, propositional. I could not, for the life of me, for whatever reason, think of that word. The 2.3 starts to
I see that. Yeah.
get into that, and then 2.4 is where that comes in. I wouldn't say like super heavy. So
That's been
I
going-
thought that 2.1 and 2.2, because it looked like there was quite a bit of meat in 2.1.
Okay.
So I thought that might be 2.1 and 2.2, but they seem to kind of maybe flow together, so that those two I think would be good for next week.
All right. So let's do pages 21 through up to 2.3, which is ends at 26. So 22 through 25. So not that much. I haven't read it yet, so I don't really know. But even if it's just 15, as long as we talk about it for at least like 15, 30 minutes, I'm satisfied with. If it's not, it doesn't matter if it doesn't go an hour.
Yeah, I don't think with this, I don't really want to call it a course, but this reading that we're doing, that we should do like, the hour and a half, 2 hour launch, just because I think that gets a little much for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll stop here. Yeah, for me. Yeah, for us.
That sounds cool.
Okay. Can we stop sharing my? How do I? Where's my StreamYard?
How do you stop?
Well, Speed should be able to just cut your sharing off when he wants.
I don't know. I don't even know where my StreamYard is, guys.
You can't.
I lost
share
it.
No more. You can't share no more.
I hope so, because I don't even know where y'all are. There it is. Okay. Too many tabs.
We got 1 hyena and 3 hominids. We should all be hyenas.
Scott is turning into a lion, though.
Is he?
Yeah.
I'm already a lion, so.
Already a lion. So let's see. Let's see if I can actually. I've got to get this reading done early, or I'm never going to do it like I did today. I was going to read it, and then I ended up spending all day at the bank trying to get COVID from the bankers. Trying to get COVID.
I can't find my StreamYard. I have so many tabs open.
I don't know how y'all do this. Like, I'll see Erica Gibbons, she's streaming, and she's got like literally like 13 tabs open. I'm just like, oh, woman, I don't get how y'all people do that. I don't get it.
I have like 50 to 100 open usually. And after like a Saturday night at the Atheist, I had like 25 tabs. And then once I even crashed my Mac, Chrome actually crashed my Mac. And I've got like a 2019 loaded MacBook Pro. And it actually killed that. So you can imagine Chrome is kind of a bitch.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, it can be. Especially on Macs. I mean, Chrome works on MacBooks. It works pretty well, but I don't think it's quite as streamlined as what you might get on a PC, but it doesn't have enough problems to make it prevent. Because most of those tabs are for papers from my dumb research. Well, I wouldn't say your research is dumb. The one thing that I have found that reduces the number of tabs is when if there's like some form of technical literature or a PDF file or a book or something that I can pull up online that I'm consistently referring to, I save it in my keep notes. So I just save it as a note. That way I can consistently go back to it without having to have a browser tab open for it all the time.
Yep. So what's been happening in...
either that or I bookmark it.
I'm looking at chat to see if we got anything or if anybody asked any questions that we need to answer. If you guys have questions, now would be the time to pop them out.
And for any future viewers, if you do have questions about what we're talking about, I would recommend tagging one of the people, one of the 4 people in the stream. Are we planning on throughout this trying to keep it to just us 4, not like to be exclusive, but just so we don't have other people involved?
That's y'all's decision. I really don't. I mean, I feel like
we do not want it to turn into a massive jam of opinions and arguments and stuff. We're just kind of reading the text and trying to glean what we can from it, trying to figure out what the parameters are. But very interesting stuff today on content categories and
Yes, Erica, I thought this was a very successful discussion.
It was very informative. Got our little brains thinking, at least my little brain thinking about the nature of mathematics.
Yeah.
Math is one of those things. It just is.
Okay, so
one issue to raise, when we talk about knowledge being represented, with the
things
fact
being
that
represented, objects being represented.
objects being represented, the fact that our brain has to fill in like this gap in our vision to have a complete picture of what we're seeing, basically means that part of what we're seeing is presumed or false, or not false, made up, and other kind of tricks that our brain plays on us that I really don't have the.
Go ahead, Speed.
There's an interesting thing about your brain. Your brain is wired as a predictive mechanism, so that when you get some signal, if that signal is something that you've seen many hundreds of or thousands of times, what you will actually start to see is the next thing that it should be. And if it turns out to be different from that, you'll get this sort of like what feeling, where you kind of like step back and you'll rethink it. But your brain, your cortex is actually wired with a feed forward through layer 1, where it actually feeds forward to what the next thing should be if the world is working the way it should be. So you have an inductive mechanism built right into the wiring of your brain.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak, to kind of add on to that, because you were alluding a little bit to what I said, but to speak to what Scott said. I've had conversations with maybe a couple people in the field of neuroscience, and what I have been told is that it's not so much that the brain is sort of inventing something and filling it in, so much as the brain projecting prior knowledge or the prior recognition of patterns and things like that onto something to better understand it. And
which is another way to say
what?
Another way to say what I just said.
Yeah,
it's actually built into the wiring of your brain.
We can see this when people read words. If you see the word "the" twice, and if you're just reading, at your normal pace, you're probably going to completely miss the fact that there were 2 "thes" in that sentence right there. Or like if you've ever seen one of those memes on like Facebook or Twitter where the words, it's generally spelled the same, but there's like a couple letters that are switched, but your brain can still read it because your brain doesn't actually analyze every single letter in a word. It analyzes some of them, and as long as the structure of the word, like what or there or monkey or what have you, is the same, the brain can recognize it.
Do you know why that is?
Why I'm not an idealist, because I do think that the brain isn't just like inventing something.
Do you know why your brain doesn't analyze every single thing? Because if it did, the bear would eat you.
Yeah.
Don't want the bear to eat us. So my question is, and Danny, is what we know about neuropsychology or neuroscience, does that affect philosophy in any way, or the way we evaluate philosophy?
There's a big marriage right now between psychology, a little bit of neuroscience, and philosophy of mind. Now you're talking to the wrong person, because I think it's an unholy matrimony, but there are a lot of people that love that marriage and think that it's the best thing for all the domains that I just listed. But yeah, no, there's definitely impact there. Most philosophers think that our discoveries of psychology and our neuroscience has big impact on our philosophy of mind. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Now my view, but my view is that it's all mistaken. But no, it's not. I'm a minority, so
I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but just out of genuine curiosity, Danny, would you consider yourself just a dualist or a substance dualist?
No, I reject substance dualists.
Okay, so when you say that you think the mind is dual, would that still fit within some physicalist framework where the thing, the other part of the mind could still be physical or contained within physical reality? It doesn't require something mystical or divine or supernatural, or maybe you don't quite know yet?
Well, no, I think that a lot of what I have to say would make physicalists throw up. So but yeah, because I think that
it can make a physicalist remove you from the stream.
But go ahead.
Are you a neutral monist?
No, I'm not. I mean, I could accept. Look, if I were to be a monist, I'd be a dual aspect theorist, which that was almost like Kant's view, I think. but the idea is that you could understand there to be two kinds of things in the world, or you could understand there being one thing in the world, and then there are different aspects of that thing, the mental and the physical. But I don't really hold a position with respect to whether monism or dualism in terms of just overall ontology.
Varieties of dualism. Okay, we'll have to look at that sometime and get into it. But I wonder what else we should say about this, about what we read. I think as we go forward, we'll kind of tack back to that a little bit, to the Kantian view and stuff. We don't have enough really to get our mitts in right now. I don't think. Do you? Does anybody?
I don't, but because it seemed that the author was writing when he was talking about that this is going to be something that he refers back to, and some of the questions that he's raising now will be slowly answered as you go through the book.
Yeah, like for I think what's going on with the Kant stuff is that Kant laid out pieces for people to kind of play
Put together
with
themselves.
You're right. Yeah. Now, they might disagree with Kant on how to arrange the pieces, right? But nonetheless, we owe a lot to Kant for creating these distinctions. Well, I should be clear that Leibniz and Hume had similar distinctions, but they weren't characterized as succinctly as Kant. I think I forgot it was very similar distinctions. Like if you were to read it, well, of course, Kant was heavily influenced by Hume. I think he said something like Kant woke him up from his like whoa,
what was Kant's era, like the century or centuries?
He died in 1802, I think,
Okay.
1800,
So,
early 1800s.
Throughout the mid-late 1700s, I'm assuming is when he would have been. Okay, that's what his prominence was.
And
that's
then
what
before that was Hume.
Wasn't it that Hume kind of pissed him off? So he sort of
he deeply respected Hume.
But I mean, at the same time, he felt compelled by what Hume got wrong to go further. I think, right?
You could say it that way, but I think that you can always be inspired by your opponents. I think I would want to characterize it that way, because Kant and Hume were like opposites, right? Hume was an atheist, Kant was a theist. Hume was a kind of was a non-cognitivist, right? Or arguably a non-cognitivist, right? About morality.
Oh,
what?
No, I was going to ask theological non-cognitivist.
Probably. I'm not
related to something else.
Yeah, but he gave really good arguments against like miracles and stuff like that. Now, Kant did offer arguments. He didn't think all of the natural theology worked, like cosmological argument, ontological argument, design arguments. He thought they were all garbage, and he presented very good. He presented one of the best responses to the ontological argument in history, right?
I feel like I might have read about that, like probably 5+ years ago now, but I need to look back into that.
Yeah, very briefly, it's just that existence is not a property.
Well, no, and see that's the position I take. Did Hume have a similar? I'm going to use this word very loosely. A similar philosophy on existence. I thought he did, but I'm not for sure. But I don't view existence as a property either. I view existence as an adjective. It's a description of things that have property.
Oh, Kant would disagree.
Property itself.
He thinks. I think Kant would. I think for Kant, descriptions would be something like properties. But to describe something as existing for Kant wasn't adding anything to the object.
Yeah, like what's the difference between a red apple and a red existing apple?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. But the weird thing is that the second, I think one view is that the second that you talk about an object, right, that there's an object. There is an object, right?
Yep.
And whether you're talking about it abstractly or not, there is a kind of existence to it already, But I don't know. There's a lot of reasons. But anyway, Kant, just completely dismantled natural theology. But and the point is that Hume and Kant were like opposites, right? Like Kant, his moral philosophy was just like completely antithetical to like almost all of the empiricists, like Locke and Mill and all of them, right? Just all of it. But he was nonetheless like really moved by Hume. Yep. If there are two philosophers that anyone should, and this applies to myself, that anybody should be very familiar with in terms of history and the modern era, is Hume and Kant. Your Hume and Kant.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Okay, guys, should we end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Scott, you need to stick around after we end the stream. Shall we end the stream? Everybody
Oh,
agree?
I'm being held after class.
Being held after class. Okay, I'm ending the broadcast. Thanks everyone out there. And I do need an outro, but I don't have one. So
Sorry.